Alright, people said they wanted to see these builds in action, so let's attract some attention, shall we?
You murdered someone in view of a guard.
Alright, here we go. We'll just pass with these two, because they're not what we're focusing on. Surprised they won initiative. We have very good initiatives in this party. That must have been a very good roll from the enemies there. Alright, so we should have at least 3 more attacks this round after having blown up a whole pile of civilians, unfortunately. Let's see how many Flaming Fists we can drop. Not the most dangerous enemies, but kind of fun that we're just going to get them all in one round. There goes one. Critical miss again. This one's now stuck on an ice surface. Alright, on Honor mode, this next attack would be our last one, but on Tactician mode, we still have a couple more. And there you have it. Combat's over. Let's get to the build. Hello my friends and welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 build guide. Hope you're all doing well. Today I have for you one of the most powerful ranged characters in the game, who in the late game will be launching 4 or 5 nuclear bombs every single turn, completely obliterating the arena and clearing it of all enemies, basically instantly. Grouped enemies in particular will fall before this character very, very quickly, and you can clear enemy chaff or adds that are attached to boss fights almost instantly, while still having some of the highest single target damage in the game. So if you're looking for a damage character, this is the way to go. This character does take a little while to come online, and will pay off near the end game with one of the most powerful class features in the game. But during the build up, you still get to be a totally functional, powerful archer. You do not suffer at all during your level up process. The character that I'm talking about, of course, is the Hunter Ranger, and this will actually be a monoclassed build, so if you are someone who prefers to never multiclass, then this build will also be very good for you. This build is a pure damage build. Hunter Ranger is based almost solely on maximizing their damage output, and so this character will fit well into any party that just needs to add additional damage, especially AoE damage, to their party. Let's get into it and build the character. I'm using, of course, Minsc as the example character here because he's the ranger of the party, but if you are building this for a main character, then you are going to want probably a halfling, a deep gnome for stealth proficiency and saving throw advantage, halfling to reroll ones, wood elf for bonus movement speed, or dwergar because they have the free invisibility, which is of course extremely powerful for an archer. Basically, all the normal good races are still good for this build. For our attribute selection, we actually get to take a greedier attribute split than most other characters. The reason for this is that as a dexterity-based ranged damage-dealing class, we are effectively single attribute dependent, or SAD, which is actually a good thing to be in Dungeons & Dragons. Because our damage scales with our dexterity, and dexterity is the best stat in the game, being used for initiative, being used for armor class, and also being one of the most important saving throws in the game, we can focus in on raising only a couple attributes very high. We mostly don't use these other attributes, and so we can drop them down very low. We can take 8 strength, 17 dexterity, 16 constitution to maximize our hit points and constitution saving throws, and then 15 wisdom, getting all of our important saving throws very high while maximizing our damage stat. This is one of the advantages that all dexterity-based characters have over every other character in the game, is that the stat they already want to raise to maximum is a stat that every character wants already, reducing their attribute dependency significantly and making it much easier to take these greedier stat splits. For our skill selection, the only really important one is that you have stealth. You probably on a ranger as well, definitely, you should also probably have perception because you're going to have decent wisdom, and perception's just very important to have a decent value somewhere in your party. On Minsc specifically, you're stuck with animal handling and survival, which is unfortunately terrible, but because both of those skills are pretty useless. On a main character, you would want to take a background that provided you more useful skills. You could take sleight of hand and stealth from the urchin background, for example, which would be a much more useful background to select for your ranger. Both of those are going to be incredibly strong. This will be a great lockpicking character because you have high dexterity, so if you take sleight of hand proficiency, you'll make an excellent lockpicker for your party. But the only important ones to make sure you have are stealth and perception. For our favored enemy here, we are going to take Bounty Hunter, because these favored enemy bonuses are actually all very, very tiny, and Bounty Hunter gives us a significant advantage in the early game. Ensnaring Strike is one of the spells that we will want to have access to in the early game, and even though we will later on not have high enough wisdom to reliably land it, Bounty Hunter gives enemies disadvantage on it, making it much more likely that they will fail the save. Entangled is one of the most dangerous crowd control conditions in the game, and being able to apply that very reliably at low levels means that you can use that in boss fights for a tremendous amount of extra crowd control. It's an extremely powerful effect that we will only use for the early game, but given that the bonuses on the rest of these are so minor, it does not hurt us at all to invest in making our early game smoother. Again, if you're playing Minsc specifically and getting this in the extreme late game, then you probably just take whatever you want for flavor reasons. If there's a specific heavy armor piece you want him to wear, you could take Ranger Knight, but other than that, none of the spells are useful, and so it's only the skill proficiencies that matter. But in the early game, Bounty Hunter is going to be the most powerful. Natural Explorer gives us actually good bonuses, though. If you're Minsc, you won't want Beast Tamer because you already have Boo. You don't need to take Beast Tamer to get Find Familiar. In fact, it's really weird that the game gives you this when his unique ability supersedes it. But you probably will want to take Wasteland Wanderer Fire. This character actually ends up deceptively tanky because you're going to have great AC thanks to your high dexterity, great hit points thanks to Ranger's good hit point scaling, and your high constitution, and you'll have damage resistance to many common damage types thanks to Wasteland Wanderer. You normally wouldn't think of a ranged DPS character as being one of the tankiest characters in the game, but in Dungeons & Dragons, these actually end up as some of the toughest characters out there, just naturally based on their high hit points and gaining damage resistance. In the very early game, again, if you are playing this as a main character or just from the beginning, you might want to take Beast Tamer just because familiars are so powerful. You would want the Raven to blind enemies. If you can handle the microing of familiars, which personally I find pretty annoying, but you may enjoy it. But overall, by the late game, you're going to want to have taken Wasteland Wanderer Fire because you want all three Wasteland Wanderers. Alright, that's our level 1 build. Let's jump in and level up. I will also show you later on one of the most potent item combos for an archer, just a little teaser of what's to come, because it's one that I think is pretty cool and will benefit any archer, not just this archer, but is very good. Alright, for our fighting style at level 2, we are going to take archery. Of course, this is an archer build, and we are intending to make gigantic numbers of attacks, so increasing our likelihood to hit is extremely potent. This also combos very, very well with the Sharpshooter feat, which is critically important to our damage and which we will be taking shortly, because the +2 bonus to ranged weapon attacks mitigates the mischance of Sharpshooter significantly. Sharpshooter reduces your attack rolls by 5, but archery gives you a +2 bonus, and then since you can start most fights hidden thanks to your stealth proficiency and ability to attack from range, you'll get advantage on a lot of attacks as well, so you'll very reliably land Sharpshooter attacks when combined with the archery fighting style. For our spells, you really have two choices. You have to take Hunter's Mark. It's just very important at this early level for your damage. And actually, if you get 2 hand crossbows, you may want to roll with 2 hand crossbows for a while, just to maximize the number of Hunter's Mark attacks you're landing. On the first round of combat, you'll still only get 1 attack with the hand crossbows and Hunter's Mark, because you have to use your bonus action to land Hunter's Mark, but on subsequent rounds of combat you can benefit from having a bonus action ranged attack to apply Hunter's Mark again. But this is just so important to your damage at low levels that you have to take Hunter's Mark. And then your second spell is going to depend basically on does somebody else in your party have access to Longstrider. If they don't, you have to take Longstrider. You're sort of priced into it. It's too good to leave on the table. Longstrider is incredibly important because increasing your movement speed for free is so valuable. It increases your whole party's movement speed. So any party that's running around without Longstrider is hurting themselves massively, especially for an archer who wants to be running away from enemies. If you already have Longstrider on someone else, then you take Ensnaring Strike. Ranger level 3, we get to take our subclass, and the subclass that we are taking is Hunter. Hunter is kind of a long-term play, as it were, because the early levels of Hunter don't give you bonuses that are as strong as the other two Hunter subclasses, but we're in it for the long haul, and in the late game, Hunter's power spike is immense. You could theoretically respec into this build at level 11 when you get your massive late game power spike, but I'm just going to show you the full build all the way through with Hunter, using Hunter, because it's still a very strong class all the way through, just it's kind of backloaded in terms of the power spike. You get your massive late game power spike quite late. We will also, of course, have to select a Hunter's Prey, and there are 3 options here, although really only 2 options. Since we're an archer, using our reaction to make a melee attack on a very, very unlikely to occur condition is obviously not good, so we'll never be taking Giant Killer here. So the choice is really between Colossus Slayer and Hordebreaker. Hordebreaker gives you the ability to make a free attack, so you make a Hordebreaker attack, and as long as another enemy is within the AoE of the Hordebreaker attack, you get to make a second attack against the second enemy. This is very powerful and sounds really good, except that the AoE is tiny, and the chances of 2 enemies actually being grouped close enough together for Hordebreaker to work are very low in most fights. It's like a less than 5 foot radius AoE, so enemies have to be standing practically on top of each other for Hordebreaker to actually go off. I don't think it's a bad selection because Colossus Slayer is also pretty situational. 1d8 extra damage if your target's below its hit point maximum is good for finishing off weaker enemies, but is going to be an extra, on average, 4.5 damage per round some rounds. Not every round, because sometimes you'll attack a full health enemy. Whereas Hordebreaker is going to be a full extra attack, which will probably average to about 20 damage pretty soon, but very rarely. So you kind of have to decide which of those 2 things you'd rather take. I think for the safe pick is to take Colossus Slayer, but Hordebreaker is also a reasonable pick. I don't think it's bad. I just personally find it somewhat difficult to use because the AoE, the radius on its attack is just so small. For our spell selection here, we're actually going to take Enhance Leap. The reason for this is another free ritual spell that will give you a jump. There's a couple other options that you can go with here. You could take Fog Cloud, you could take Goodberry. Fog Cloud is very powerful because it's basically a free no-save blind, but it would also be a 3rd concentration spell, so I don't know if you want 3 concentration spells for your character. So I would recommend taking Enhanced Leap, which actually provides you a significant amount of mobility in combat, even with your low jump distance, because this is a low-strength character. Enhanced Leap increases your jump distance massively, meaning that you can gain tremendous amounts of mobility. This is one of the best tools for kiting. If you need to run away from a fight on honor mode, you can attack, jump backwards, be well outside of the enemy's range very easily, and can use this to gain tremendous amounts of distance and so on. It also can put you in some of the most advantageous positions if there's areas you want to get up on cliffs or whatever, where enemies can't easily get to you. Enhanced Leap is very powerful to have on any ranged character. At Ranger level 4, we also have a difficult choice to make, and that's, do we want to clean up these 2 odd numbers by taking an ability improvement in Dexterity and Wisdom, or do we want to get Sharpshooter as soon as possible? For me, the answer is actually pretty easy. We want Sharpshooter as soon as possible. Sharpshooter gives you the ability to take a -5 penalty to your attack roll for +10 damage, an extra 10 damage is so much damage at this level, and it's even more damage next level when we start getting more attacks. You can also mitigate this hit penalty pretty easily because we have archery fighting style, and we have advantage on our first attacks in most combats, because we're going to start most combats hidden. So you will be landing your attacks very reliably. Increasing the damage of those attacks is therefore extremely important, so we take Sharpshooter at level 4. At Ranger level 5, we get extra attack, meaning that we are attacking twice as often, which is of course incredibly powerful, especially because all of our attacks do so much damage now. For our spell selection, for our level 2 spells, we definitely want Spike Growth, because Spike Growth allows you to put a wall effectively between you and enemies, and then they have to move through the Spike Growth in order to get to your character. 20-foot radius is a gigantic radius, so even though this does take your concentration, this is absolutely crippling for melee enemies, who will spend sometimes up to 2 turns wading through the Spike Growth, especially against enemies who can't jump, of which there's many in the game, or areas where enemies can't jump, where like narrow hallways or whatever. You can use Spike Growth very effectively to block enemy movement. We also, at this point, probably want to replace Ensnaring Strike. We have reached the point where our save DC is not going to be good enough, even with the disadvantage, and we now have another concentration spell, so the chances of using Ensnaring Strike are low. We will have been very happy we had it for the first 3 levels, I guess, but at this point we can probably get rid of it and take something that's a little more useful in sort of the later game. In this case, we're probably going to pick up Pass Without Trace. The reason that we grab Pass Without Trace is for allies with greater invisibility. We won't use it yet. Obviously, you won't use it until for 2 more levels, but we're just going to pick it up now. If you're still using Ensnaring Strike, you could take this later, but I'm just doing this now before I forget to replace the spell. At Ranger level 6, you get to gain some additional things. One thing that is also, I should say this, one thing that's sort of insulting about the Hunter Ranger is you don't get a subclass feature at level 5, whereas both other Ranger types do, which is kind of annoying. Obviously, I'd like for there to be a bonus there. We get another favorite enemy here. You should just pick based on flavor, whatever you think is your character wants. The most mechanically optimal of these is probably Keeper of the Veil, because protection from evil and good does come up sometimes, or Ranger Knight if there's a specific heavy armor piece that you want to wear. This does include boots, helmets, and gloves, but I believe there's only one heavy armor helmet in the game, which you probably won't want on your Ranger. That said, if you do want the Ranger to wear the heavy armor helmet, you can take Ranger Knight. But we'll just take Keeper of the Veil here. And we will take Wasteland Wanderer for cold, gaining resistance to another common damage type. This is also pretty nice because cold damage shows up most in Act 2, and level 6 is when you're probably entering Act 2, so you get the damage resistance right on time to resist all the cold damage in Act 2. At Ranger level 7, you get a Hunter Ranger defensive tactic feature. These are also fairly minor bonuses. Opportunity attacks have disadvantage is something that can let you get out of close contact with enemies pretty quickly. Advantage on saving throws against being frightened is a nice passive bonus. We will have pretty good saves versus frightened because as a ranger, we will end up with 16 wisdom next level, so we'll just have decent wisdom saving throws, and we can have advantage on saves against being frightened means we're unlikely to become frightened. Frightened isn't that bad for this character because you don't need to move every single turn of combat, but still obviously one of the more dangerous conditions in the game and one you want to avoid. And multi-attack defense, which prevents enemies from hitting you, makes it harder for enemies to hit you with several attacks in a single round. Of these, I think that the most likely to come up is actually multi-attack defense against certain bosses, like enemy archers and whatever. You can prevent yourself from being one-shot, so I'm going to pick that just as a safety metric. Again, I don't think this pick is particularly important, because this only applies to the second attack in a round, but that's still pretty useful against some enemies that attack multiple times a turn. This only applies specifically against fear, and fear immunity is something that we'll be looking out for just in general in our party builds anyways, so I wouldn't take Steel Will. And Escape the Horde you can mitigate just with good positioning, and since you have Enhanced Leap and everything, we are able to have, and Long Strider and so on, our positioning should be such that we're not getting into melee anyways. If you find yourself getting into melee and needing to just walk away from enemies frequently, you can take Escape the Horde if you want. For our spell selection here, we'll just take a utility spell, something like Fog Cloud or Goodberry you could take. Protection from Poison and Silence also have some minor uses. Lesser Restoration can remove some dangerous effects in sort of an emergency. None of these are going to be ones that you're going to use that frequently, so we'll just take Lesser Restoration because it's always good to have a panic button somewhere in your party, and this is a reasonable way to always have that spell prepared. Ranger level 8, you get two things. You get Landstride Difficult Terrain, which is actually really good because this makes you immune to your own spike growths, so now you can place spike growth under yourself and freely move through it, and it will make you immune to plant growth, which we will get next level as well. So that's a very powerful effect that makes you able to manipulate the battlefield much better. We also get a feat and can take an ability improvement to put our dexterity to 18 and our wisdom to 16. This lets us even out our numbers and have great saving throws as well as better hit chances. One alternative that you could use, incidentally, is if you want to get Ethel's Hair, you could have started with only 16 wisdom, take Ethel's Hair for dexterity, and instead of taking this odd number split, you could take the Athlete feat for dexterity. This lets you boost your dexterity by 1 and increases your jump distance by 50%. This combined with Enhanced Leap will give you massive jump distance and is actually a pretty good use, but if you are getting Ethel's Hair, other characters are going to want it way more than this character, who already just has a great attribute spread. So generally, I wouldn't advise spending that on this character, who's very self-sufficient in terms of stats. You should use that for a character that needs the help more. Ranger level 9, we get access to 3rd level spells, and the 3rd level spell that we're going to take is Plant Growth. Plant Growth is 1/4 movement speed, so all the great things about Spike Growth, but even better, and it's not even concentration, which makes it even more powerful. Other options at this level, the 2 damage spells are unfortunately quite weak, so you're going to avoid them. Protection from Energy will allow you to get resistance to another energy type that you aren't currently resistant to, and it lasts all day, so you can use this to become resistant to every enemy energy type. If there are enemies who are lightning or thunder damage that you don't have resistance to, then you can grab protection from energy, but we'll take Plant Growth first. Ranger level 10, we get another favored enemy, and at this point you know what I'm going to say. Take whichever one you think is most flavorful. These 3 are probably the most mechanically optimal picks, but it really doesn't matter. And then, of course, we're going to max out our natural explorer resistances by taking Wasteland Wanderer Poison, gaining resistance to 3 of the most common damage types in the game. And finally, it's the moment you've all been waiting for. This is why we're playing this character, because at Hunter level 11, you get Volley. Volley is an attack action, so this just uses your attack, but it's an AoE, and it makes a ranged attack against every single enemy in that area. Some important things about Volley. It will apply your weapon damage to everybody, so bonuses to your weapon damage are incredibly powerful on this effect. If you are making these attacks many times per round, then increasing your weapon damage is massively important to increase your volley damage. Individual attacks can critically hit, so increasing your crit chance is very good. It also will not target allies, so you can safely fire it into the middle of an engagement and just hit the enemies, which is, of course, incredibly powerful. And it's an attack action, so even just with nothing, no other bonuses, you can fire this multiple times per round already, 2 times per round. This character is one of the best users of haste and elixirs of bloodlust, even on honor mode, because this action is so powerful. So even though those bonus action attacks, or those extra actions only let you make 1 attack instead of 2 on honor mode, you will still be able to make these gigantic numbers of attacks against every enemy in a combat arena because you have Volley, making you still one of the best users for those effects, haste and bloodlust elixirs. One thing that it doesn't work with is weapon coatings. On-hit effects for your weapons will only apply to 1 enemy in the Volley. So poisons will still only apply to 1 enemy, unfortunately, which I think is a little silly. I wish it worked on every enemy, but it doesn't. But that isn't a huge part of your damage anyways. Just being able to make a weapon attack against multiple enemies in a pretty large AoE is ludicrously powerful, and the amount of damage you're going to be outputting in the late game with this build is unreal. For our spell selection, of course, we'll just grab Protection from Energy. And then finally, at level 12, we are going to take our feat and max out our dexterity to make sure we are landing our shots very frequently. Let me show you how Volley works here as well. So basically, you select Volley, and you get this AoE effect, and everything that you shoot in it is going to take a hit. So if we fire this at this, all this furniture, you can see it all gets attacked. It only took 13 damage there because it all has damage resistance. But any bonuses that we can apply to our weapon affect that as well. So let's imagine that we have a set of gloves, for example. I think I have them on Karlach actually right now. Yes, here we go. Let's imagine that we have the Helldusk gloves. Our weapon attacks do an extra d4 damage. Well, that's an extra d4 damage to everything. And that, by itself, is ridiculously powerful. And any other bonus damage that we stack on anybody is going to be added to every single attack in the Volley. Unlike other sources of AoE weapon attacks, this is not limited by the number of enemies in the area, or not limited to a certain number of enemies, so it's going to hit every single enemy in the area, no matter how many there are. That means that the more enemies there are packed into an area, the more damage you're going to do. You can, for example, use the Black Hole Illithid power to pull a bunch of enemies into an area, and then hit them all with a volley to get a gigantic nuclear bomb combo all going at once. Also, any additional damage that we can stack on our weapon is really good. So for itemization, we're going to look at anything that increases our weapon damage. For example, stuff like the Flawed Helldusk gloves that increase your weapon damage dice. Another cool combo, and this is the one that I wanted to talk about earlier, is that as an archer, we get an additional use for this item, the Drakethroat Glaive. This, I believe you find in Act 2, and it has the Draconic Elemental Weapon spell on it, normally only a Paladin spell, and operates in a kind of funny way when you're an archer. Normally, this spell can only be cast on the Drakethroat Glaive itself, because you can see we have it here, but if we were to unequip the glaive, then the spell disappears. So we would only be able to cast it on the equipped weapon because it's targeted on the person. However, when you have a ranged weapon, if you switch to your ranged weapon set and then cast Draconic Elemental Weapon on yourself, then the bonus is going to go on the ranged weapon, and you can even unequip the Drakethroat Glaive, and the long arm of the Gur still stays powerful, still keeps the bonus. This allows us to add cold damage to it, which is important because that combines very well with this ring, the Snowburst ring. So not only is this just additional damage, which is great on every ranged weapon, but the Snowburst ring means that we get an ice circle every time we deal cold damage to an enemy. This means that every single weapon attack has a chance of proning an enemy and also puts them in a dangerous location. So now we have an extremely powerful effect just on our normal weapon attacks. Now, unfortunately, this is an on-hit attack effect, so it's only going to affect one enemy with volley, but one enemy in the volley area at a time, but this is just such a powerful combo throughout the mid game that it's very important to mention, and it still does the extra cold damage to everybody, which is of course very good. For other gear, you're going to be looking for things that increase your critical hit chance, including any daggers that increase your critical hit chance, so including any like weapons that increase your critical hit, so something like the Knife of the Undermountain King, we can use that and it will increase our critical hit even with the bow. Additional items that increase our critical hit chance, like this Covert Cowl, for example, are very powerful, and anything that adds flat damage to your attacks, because that will be applied across your volley. You also, for your armor, are going to want any of the medium armors that allow you to use your full dexterity bonus, like the Armor of Agility here, which when combined with a shield in your offhand, let me grab a shield from somebody, is going to give you some of the best AC in the game. We have 24 AC here because we get to use our full dexterity as well as medium armor, and we get to wear a shield. You still benefit from the AC of a shield and the passive bonuses of your dagger, even when you have your ranged weapon equipped. So even though we have our ranged weapon equipped, we still have 24 AC, and that allows these ranged characters who are dexterity based to have the highest ACs in the game, and let this character be very tanky. Alright, my friends, I hope that you've enjoyed this video, and as always, of course, if you have, do please feel free to leave a comment, like the video, and you can subscribe to my channel for more of this and other strategy game content. Cheers, my friends, and I'll catch you next time.